There is a very specific kind of violence that only a game like Beat the Boss could make feel normal. Because the funny part was, he could not hit back. The boss stood there in that quiet little room with his round head, angry face, and irritating attitude, acting like he was in control, but he never really was. He provoked you instead. The boss was annoying on purpose, the reactions were exaggerated, and every hit felt like the game was encouraging you to keep going. Even though the whole thing was built around cartoon cruelty, it never felt heavy when you were young. It felt creative. It felt funny. It felt calming in a way that almost makes no sense now. And that is why so many people remember it. Different characters, different versions of the boss, different outfits and styles, more weapons, bigger reactions, cooler animations. It was simple, but it never felt empty. That is what made it so easy to love. And that is what makes it so uncomfortable
to look back on now.
Because underneath the goofy sounds, the cheap laughs, and the childish art style, this was still a game built around one very ugly idea: turn frustration into entertainment. And that is why Beat the Boss is worth talking about. Not just because it was popular, but because it was one of the clearest examples of how a game could feel childish, harmless, and even comforting, while still being built on something much darker underneath. So before we talk about how it changed, how it grew, and why it slowly faded away, we have to go back to where it all started. Back to that quiet little room. Back to the boss. Kick the Boss started in one lonely little room, and that made perfect sense. This was the first time we were meeting Boss, so the game was not trying to give us a world yet. First, it had to make that one room memorable. That room was the whole formula in its purest form. One target, one space, one fast loop, one reason to hit back. That is why the first game felt so instantly addictive. You opened the app, saw Boss right in front of you, picked a weapon, and within seconds, the joke was already working. His whole design made him feel like someone who deserved what was coming. The smug face, the stiff posture, the expressions, the speech bubbles, all of it made him feel like he was still talking down to you even while the whole game was built around humiliating him. That is why the violence never felt random. The game made sure it felt like payback. That is how the first game got away with being so simple. But the reason the series became more than a tiny novelty is because it did not stay in that room forever. The jump to Beat the Boss 2 is where everything gets bigger, and that jump felt massive for a reason. The series realized one room was not enough anymore. So instead of one boxed-in space, the game opened up into a town map with more stages, more set pieces, and more places for the same joke to happen. That changed everything, because a one-room game feels disposable. A game with multiple places feels like a world. That is why the second game hit so much harder with returning players. It was still the same idea: annoy the boss, hit back, laugh at the reaction. But now the joke had somewhere to live. Different areas gave the same loop different personalities. The game suddenly felt less like that random app, and more like something you could actually spend time in. That is the point where the series stopped feeling tiny, and the weapons helped carry that feeling too. This was never a game about balance. It was a game about variety. That is why the arsenal felt so memorable. Every new item gave the player the same thought: what happens if I use this next? Not because the outcome mattered strategically, because the reaction was the reward. By the time Beat the Boss 3 arrived, the game was already starting to feel less like one silly app and more like a proper mobile franchise. There were more layers, more systems, more things to unlock, more reasons to stay longer than you originally planned. Even He's employees started celebrating in the office background every time their boss gets taken out by you. And then Beat the Boss 4 pushed that even further. That is where the series becomes the biggest version of itself, a larger world map. This is also the version where the boss identity becomes more complete. The series no longer feels like one generic office guy standing in a room. It feels like a full franchise built around him. Different looks, different boss styles, different outfit variations, and a stronger sense that this one irritating character had become the face of the entire series. That matters because it explains why the game stayed so memorable. It kept making itself feel bigger. The first game gave you a room. The second gave you places. The third gave you systems. The fourth gave you a whole machine. And through all of that, the players still felt like the franchise had more to give. That is why so many people remember it so vividly. Because even though the loop was simple, the game kept layering just enough newness onto it that it never felt empty. That same growth is also what made the game start feeling worse. Because the bigger Beat the Boss got, the harder it became to pretend it was just a joke. The turning point was not the violence itself. The turning point was when the violence stopped being the whole point and started becoming the center of a reward system. That is where Beat the Boss 3 becomes important. Now it feels like hit the boss, earn coins, complete goals, unlock more, spend currency, repeat. That is a huge emotional shift. Because once the game attaches objectives, progression, and currencies to the joke stops being disposable. It becomes a loop, and once it becomes a loop, the design matters more. That is also where the game starts feeling more manipulative, not necessarily in one big obvious way, but in the way mobile games get heavier when they realize they can keep players around longer. More rewards, more unlocks, more reasons to stay, more things to chase. And this is also where the gambling side starts becoming harder to ignore. Because the game was not only giving players direct progression, it also leaned into chance-style mechanics, the kind of scratch card or luck-based reward feel that stops the game from being purely about messing around and turns it into, maybe the next try gives me something better. That matters because now the player is no longer reacting only to boss. They are reacting to the reward structure around boss. Then Beat the Boss 4 pushes that even further. This is where the series becomes the most complete version of itself, but also the most revealing. The fourth game had the biggest scale, the fullest structure, and the clearest signs that the old silly app had turned into a proper mobile product. And that is where ads start changing the rhythm of the whole experience. The original feeling was hit, laugh, leave. But later on, the loop starts feeling more like hit, claim, watch, upgrade, repeat. That sounds small, but it changes everything. Because once rewards start getting tied to ads, doubling, extra claims, and monetized friction, the game stops feeling like a toy. It starts feeling like a machine built to stretch the same interaction as long as possible. That is one of the biggest reasons the later versions feel so different from the ones people remember most fondly. The app stopped being funny first and optimized second. It became optimized first. And that is also where the 17+ side of the series matters. Because this franchise always lived in a contradiction. Kids played it constantly. But the content was always sitting in this weird space where the older the series got, the harder it became to act like it was truly made for them in the first place. That is why the 17+ version is important. Not because it changes the core idea, because it proves the core idea was always harder to justify than people wanted to admit, and still be built around a concept that gets uglier the longer you stare at it. That is exactly what happened here. The game did not suddenly become bad in one update. It gradually revealed what it had always been built on. So, if the series was that memorable, why does it feel so forgotten now? Because Beat the Boss did not end in one dramatic explosion. It aged out of itself. That is a very different kind of downfall. A game like this works best when it feels quick, cheap, and easy to laugh off. But once it becomes too layered, too monetized, too ad-shaped, and too obviously built around one ugly loop, the original charm starts breaking. And once the charm breaks, the premise is exposed. Then you are no longer left with that funny old app. You are left with a game about provoking the player, rewarding repeated cruelty, and stretching the same violent joke through systems that increasingly feel more like mobile design than real fun. That ages badly, and the studio itself was moving on too. GameHive did not stay the Beat the Boss company forever. As it grew, it built other recognizable games too, like Battlrun, which made Beat the Boss feel less like the center of the company's future and more like one franchise in a growing catalog. That does not mean another game killed the series. It means the studio kept evolving while Beat the Boss increasingly looked like something from an older mobile era. And that matters, because once the company moves forward, the old game starts losing more than updates. It starts losing importance. That is also why the older entries never felt permanent. Some versions faded from visibility, became harder to find, dropped out of the spotlight, or simply stopped feeling like active games people were still meant to discover. Even when a version technically still existed somewhere, it no longer felt alive in the way it once did. And that is what being left behind really looks like. Not a dramatic shutdown, not one clean ending, just a game becoming less visible, less current, less defended, and less worth keeping in the center of the conversation. So the series did not really die. It became the kind of thing people stopped talking about because talking about it honestly makes it sound worse than they remember. And once that happens, the version people loved is already gone. So what happened to Beat the Boss? It did not disappear because it was the most evil game ever made. It faded because it belonged to a very specific mobile era, and once that era passed, the game started looking less funny and more revealing. People grew away from it, and that is why this game is still worth remembering. Not because it was violent, but because it felt like home. A whole generation played games like this and got to experience them together. Even I played it on my parents' phones, and I loved every second of it. And if you like this video, make sure to watch this one right here. You won't regret it. But for now, I'll see you in the next one.